Welcome back. This is not a lecture. This is a talk preparing for the final exam, which is similar to the videos I posted preparing for midterm 1 and preparing for midterm 2. This is now the end of the course, and your final is coming up and is due. And I hope you'll do the best you possibly can on the final. That's the whole point of the final exam, which is comprehensive, is to show, demonstrate what you have learned and understood and grasped of the course material at the end of the course. That is why the final is not simply the last exam, but a comprehensive exam. It's also why I have structured the course, as I think you all should be aware of. That if you do better on the final exam than you have done on one or the other midterms, your percentage on the final will replace your percentage grade on the midterms, so that the final exam could be worth up to 90% of your final grade. If you do better on the midterms than you do on the final, as I've tried to explain and be very open and clear about, you won't receive a lower grade. So the final is not worth 90% as such, but it could be if it shows improvement, because that's the whole point of the course, is to show improvement and what you end the course with and walk away with. Now, that is how I've set the course up. I explained that in the document introduction to the course. I just want to re-emphasize that in terms of trying to let you know that the better you do on the final exam, the better you will do in the course, period, and it could be a real boost to you in what you've done. That being said, the final exam is comprehensive, which means it covers all the material assigned, the textbook and the lectures, throughout the course. There's a guide to writing the final exam, which I hope you'll pay attention to. There also is a list of terms to know for the final exam, which I hope you will use, because that list of terms to know for the final exam is distilled from the list of terms to know for midterm 1 and for midterm 2 and for the period of lectures and assigned readings from the textbook since the second midterm. It's an extensive list. I think about 60 terms. I'm not sure off the top of my head how many terms are on that list of terms to know. Now, obviously, too, the final, as the first two midterms, consists of two parts. Part 1 is a list of terms, some of which you've already seen, others not, meaning there's some from this last part of the course that were not covered in parts 1 or for the first midterm or the second midterm. And they're not necessarily the same ones that were on midterm 1 or midterm 2, but from the list of terms to know. By this point in time, after the feedback on midterm 1 and midterm 2, I would hope you've had a pretty good sense of what is expected, the level of detail on the terms. Again, just to go over that briefly, for each term, you need to identify the term so it could not be anything else. You need to discuss its historical context, what was going on at the time, and its importance. Why is the term there? And again, as I think I've said for each kind of preparatory lecture for midterm 1 and midterm 2, you need to be explicit in terms of this term is important because, or significant because it's not just the same description. You have to demonstrate that you understand why this term is important to Western civilization. Now, always, more is always better. And again, the basis for grading the final for each term and for the essay in part 2, which I'll talk about a bit more shortly, is the course material. It is all the textbook and all of the lectures. And what do you bring from all that material based on your analysis of that material, your synthesis of that material? What do you bring to answer the problem given you? Now, with the terms, the problem is write an answer to this term, a description of the term, placing it chronologically where it belongs, putting it in terms of its historical context and why it's important. That's the problem that you're facing, how to describe this term so that someone outside can say, oh, now I understand. I think I made the analogy too in terms of the terms, thinking of writing an encyclopedia entry for middle school or high school students. I think that's a good approach to take, saying, okay, what would they want to know, need to know if they had to do a report on one of these terms? And based on the course material, what do you bring to that? Now, again, if you have any questions about this, please just ask. And again, I'm happy to read drafts of individual terms or all the terms for part one. I'll say a bit more of that at the end of this talk. So I don't think this should come as any surprise, and you've had this same exercise, so to speak, for midterm 1 and midterm 2. So that's the terms of part 1. Part 2, the essay. Again, the only difference is that this is a comprehensive essay, not just one covering a particular chronological period or part of the course. So it covers the entire course. And it covers all of the course material. And again, the basis for grading is the course material, the textbook and the lectures, and how well you apply the course material to answering the problem given you. Now, the problem given you is, again, one of those impossible questions. And I know that those are impossible questions. That's kind of the point, because once again, there is no right or wrong answer. I'm not looking here for a particular answer, a particular position. I'm looking to see how well you have analyzed the course material, taken it into account in all of the course material that's assigned, and then apply it to the question and then formulate an argument to answering the question. So I would, again, highly encourage you, or strongly encourage you, to review the document historical argument posted in course documents, because the evidence for your argument is the course material. Now, the essay you've had since day one, but I'm just going to read it through again to help go through it. And it starts out with a statement. Western civilization is the myth of the West. Now, that is a proposition. The whole point of the question is to determine that proposition. Is that the case? Is Western civilization indeed the myth of the West? If so, how so? If not, why not? To do that, you will need, and here comes the second sentence or part of it, you will need to trace the origins, development, impact of the myth of the West, or the ideology of the West, from the rise of civilization as such to approximately 1800. Now, I've talked about the myth and how I use the term myth. Talked about the myth of Rome, talked about the myth of Christendom, and then the transformation of the myth of Christendom to the myth of the nation state as we move into early modernity. And this is, in some ways, saying that overall, as we look at the development of Western civilization overall, it is a myth. Because what is civilization? What is Western? That gets back to that first midterm of when does civilization become uniquely and distinctively Western civilization? So in this discussion of the myth, which is essentially equated with the ideology of the West, and again, ideology, as I use the term, is those structures that allow us to make sense of the world today, but also in the past. So it's not a negative. It's not simply saying that ideology is something out there that someone else has. We all have an ideology, whether we're aware of it or not, or label it as that or not. It's what are our basic assumptions about how the world works. That's our ideology. And that's our myth that we tell ourselves. Because, two, a myth is the stories that we tell ourselves, stories, either actual stories or implicit assumptions of how everything works. Who are we, and how did we get to be where we are, and what difference does it make that we are who we are? So in terms of this question, it is dealing with taking a position on the assertion, the proposition of Western civilization as the myth of the West, and then in answering that, doing that by tracing the origins and development and impact of the myth of the West, or the ideology of the West, from the rise of civilization as such to approximately 1800. Now, in doing that, you'll need to treat the following 4 areas explicitly. 1, the emergence and development of ancient civilizations, including Greece. 2, the Augustan Revolution and the so-called fall of Rome, including the rise of Christianity. And 3, the emergence and development of Christendom. And 4, the emergence and development of early modern Europe. Those are 4 distinct chronological periods that you'll need to address in your answer, because those are the chronological periods that we've discussed in the course. Now, the emergence and development of ancient civilizations, we start with the emergence of civilization in ancient Mesopotamia, with the potential of, well, was Catalhoyuk actually a civilization, or was it just a settlement? How do we deal with that? But in general, from the rise of civilization in Mesopotamia, which is actually the East, to then the emergence of this concept of we are the West and distinct from everything else, which we really see for the first time in Greece, based on the extant sources, where we see with the reception of and use of the Trojan War, the figure of Helen of Troy or Sparta, that became the issue of Greek identity. The Greeks are distinct from the barbarians, and the Trojan War as the first victory of the Greeks over against the barbarian East, even though Troy was further east than some of the barbarian East. So it's an ideological construct. It's not a geographical construct, because what is West and what is East depends on where you are. Now, that is now you can, in that context, you can deal with what the textbooks talks about ancient civilizations in terms of Egypt. You can bring that in if you would like. You can bring, the Persian Empire into it if you would like, which you kind of would need to if you're talking about Greece and the origins and emergence of Greek identity, because it was in the context of the Persian Wars, as Herodotus talked about. So you can bring in whatever course material you would like that you feel would best help you articulate that emergence and development of ancient civilization in context of dealing with the question of the myth of the West and the development of the myth of the West. And then the Augustan Revolution, which is the revolution of Augustus, Caesar Augustus. That gets at the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire, not in terms of the extent of control, but in terms of the form of government. And that I addressed in those lectures too, the different understandings of empire. And we see this whole revolutionary approach by Caesar Augustus to transform the minds and understandings of Romans from what had always been this idea of republican Rome to imperial Rome. And that then continues throughout then the rise of Christianity and the eventual Christianization of the empire, where we see the beginnings of the transformation of the myth of Rome under Augustus and Virgil to becoming the myth of Christendom. And then the so-called fall of Rome. I say so-called because I talked a lot about the fall of Rome in the lectures. The sources don't talk about the fall of Rome. So how does that play into our understanding of the historical development and then our assumptions of what that was about in the stories we tell ourselves, whereby the concept of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was created by Edward Gibbon in the 18th century in his great 5-volume work. Before that, there was no concept of the fall of Rome. There was transformation. So we have then the emergence and development of ancient civilizations, including Greece. Then part 2 would be the Augustan Revolution and the so-called fall of Rome, including the rise of Christianity. And then we have the emergence and development of Christendom, whereby we have lectures on that, a whole lecture on Christendom. How did it emerge and develop it, and this transformation? How did it come about? And what was the content of that transformation? And the myth of Christendom that then incorporated the myth of Rome but transformed it. And then finally, out of the Christendom, the concept of Christendom and the myth of Christendom emerged the early modern Europe and what I call the myth of the nation state. That's kind of the trajectory. And then when did civilization become uniquely and distinctively Western, which is going to be early on, but there's still different points you can point to, because civilization is one thing, Western civilization is distinct and different. So when did civilization become uniquely and distinctively Western, and what made it so? And then, is civilization then simply an idea? Or how could it be defined other than as a myth? And that gets back to the proposition Western civilization is the myth of the West. If it's not the myth of the West, how would we define it? What would it be based on? And is it something other than simply a myth, an idea, an ideology, the stories we tell ourselves about our own development? That's what the question is getting at. Then it says, answer these questions based on the course material, textbook, and lectures, and be sure to give specific details and examples. In other words, present as strong of an argument for your position as you can. That is the final exam. And that question incorporates everything we've covered. In other words, you should clearly address each of those 4 parts. You should clearly present a thesis to answer the question, and then create an argument based on the course material, which is your evidence for defending your thesis. That's what that question is all about. And how well you do so, how well you use the course material, will be the basis for your grade. This is not about opinions. This is not about what you think about it or what you feel about it or what you believe about it. That's why I say do not use those terms. Assert a position and defend it. That's the argument. I'm not going to grade your opinions or beliefs. I can grade how well you analyze the course material and select and use it to answer the question and to formulate your argument. That I can grade, and that is what I will be grading. Given that, there is no right or wrong answers. There are good answers and bad answers, and I've said that before. That applies here too. Now, in some ways, this is nothing new because the same principles have applied for midterm 1 and midterm 2, and they apply to the final. What makes the final different is it is comprehensive, and it's your last shot. So put your best foot forward. I'm not completely in la-la land. I understand pressures and times and things. But it will really help if you can plan your work on the final to give yourself time to go over what you've written, to proofread it, and make final changes, improvements, whatever, before you simply submit it. That might not be possible. That depends on your own schedule. But if it is any way possible, it will certainly help your grade. Also, formally, as I said before, I don't grade on, whether or not it is all grammatically correct. I don't grade on those bases by taking points off. Oh, that's new. But it is an issue of overall impression and care. I've made this point too before. Number 1, I do give instructions in terms of using Times New Roman font, double-spaced. Now, if you don't do that, that just means, to me, that you're just ignoring the instructions. That's not a positive. If there are grammatical mistakes, if there are spelling mistakes, if it looks like it was sloppily done and put together, that does not make a good impression. That will detract from your grade. But what I try to look at is how well do you deal with the course material and apply it to the question. That's the focus. But you're presenting yourself. Think before you hit submit. Am I presenting myself in the way I want to present myself in the best manner that I can in terms of this course and my participation in this course and my understanding of this course and the final outcome of this course for me? If you ask yourself those questions, that will help. And that is about it. We've gone over these things before. I just want to say that, I've enjoyed this course. I always enjoy this course. I hope that when it's all over and done with, you will feel that you have gotten something positive out of this course, that you've learned something from this course. And if not immediately afterwards, somewhere down the line, I hope it will come back to you. As always, I have said to you, I'm happy to read drafts, and I am. Again, on a first come, first served basis. And if everybody sends me a draft a day or two before the final is due, I'm not going to be able to get to it. But the sooner the better. I'm happy to answer questions over email. I'm happy to have Zoom sessions to talk about it. Again, my view of my role here is not only to present the class and teach the class, it's also to help you perform as well as you possibly can, given the structures of the course. That being said, reach out. I'm here to try to help. I can't always say that I can or will, but my intent is that I would like to at least try. There are no extensions on the final. This is the only set due date that is hard and fast. If there's an emergency, and I mean a real emergency, contact me as soon as you possibly can, that you become aware of the emergency, and we can deal with that. But there will be no extensions for, gosh, I have so many other things to do. Can I turn it in the next day? Or no, that will not be allowed. If you are in a car accident, if something, major happens in your life, please let me know. We can deal with those situations. But otherwise, this is a firm, fast deadline. So if you hit submit, 2 minutes after it's due, which is due at 11:59, I think on May 3rd, it will be rejected, and that will just be tough. Follow the directions and go with it. I hope you will do well. I hope you have gotten something out of this course, or at some point down the line will come to the realization that you actually did get something out of this course. And good luck doing it all. I'm looking forward to reading your finals. I've enjoyed this class, and I hope maybe to see some of you in future classes. And if there's anything I could do to help, again, just reach out and let me know. That being said, good luck, and I hope to see you. Take care. Bye-bye.